Our session, Disrupting the Norm, West Coast Strategies Winning in Long-Term Care, is now starting in the session room.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Mark Parkinson, and welcome to our session this afternoon. I specialize in being former things. So I'm the former CEO of the American Healthcare Association. I'm a former owner and operator. I'm a former governor. But the thing that defines me the most is I'm a former lieutenant governor. And that's like the most former thing you can possibly be. And you have to be in politics to understand that. I am really excited about today's session. This is something that I've wanted to do for several years, which is to really have an open discussion about what I think is a very exciting development in terms of the business model of some providers, principally in California. So, I call it, and others call it, the West Coast offense. It is a style that really has two major components. First, a completely different way of incentivizing administrators and DONs. And in some cases, in addition to that, not all, a decentralized model where local leaders in the buildings themselves make all of the critical decisions. Until about 5 or 6 years ago, I was under the misunderstanding that there were just 1 or 2 companies in California that were doing this. I'm sure that we've all heard about, Ensign and then PACS that have this type of strategy. What I've learned over the last 5 or 6 years is that it's not just Ensign and PACS, it's virtually every provider in California and a growing number of providers west of the Mississippi. This model is so revolutionary and results in sometimes so much additional compensation for administrators and DONs that even if you don't have this model, I think you need to know about it because it's coming in your direction. As the West Coast companies expand across the country, it is inevitable that this model will expand with them, and providers are going to have to make a decision. They're going to have to decide, do we adapt to this in some way? Do we adopt it? Or do we retain the model that we have and just see if we can continue to succeed in that way? I'm very thankful to Hirsch and to the eCap folks for allowing us to spend some time this afternoon highlighting this. Our goal is for you to understand the model and kind of the nuances on it, how it works, so that you can think about where it might fit into your organization. And I'm very pleased that we have 3 superstars from the long-term care sector that have agreed to not just spend the hour with us today, but have been prepping with us for several times over the last few months, giving us their time, and really willing to share what I think are some very valuable business strategies. So we're joined first by Lance Hassel. Lance is the CEO of Cambridge. Cambridge is a very successful provider in California, has over 30 buildings, long-time background in long-term care, including with Covenant, and now is the CEO of Cambridge. So let's welcome Lance. Please give Lance a round of applause. Next, joined by Mike Oxford, who is the COO of Sunmar, another very successful company located in California. They're now up to over 40 buildings. Mike also has a very long history in the long-term care sector, having spent a number of times with North Shore, Saba, and started out with Life Care, which is quite different in the model than what we have that we're talking about today. So please welcome Mike with us today. And Tim Nelson, who is the COO of Cascadia. He's also a principal, and I believe one of the principal owners of the organization. Very exciting transaction that they just undertook over the last 6 months. Cascadia is a really exciting company, over 40 buildings now in 5 states, growing pretty dramatically. Tim brings with him a background from the Ensign experience, and I think you were not just on the skilled side, you were with Pennant on the assisted living side, so it'll be interesting to talk about that as well. So please welcome Tim to the stage. Tim. Okay, so Lance, I started out and I talked about how there were 2 different components of this West Coast offense. There's this compensation model that people have heard about, and then there is the decentralized decision-making model. So let's just first of all start with the compensation model. Tell us just generally, what is the compensation model for administrators and DONs in this system generally, and as specific as you want to get about what you do at Cambridge, we'd love to know about it.
Sure. So our incentive comp is for both the administrator and the DON. It's typically a percentage of net income, and we pay it on a quarterly basis. Obviously, the administrator makes more on the percentage basis than the DON, but when you aggregate it together, it's a good percentage that they would share in on the net income line. We pay it quarterly, and then we have a holdback that there are some metrics at the very end of the year that if they meet these different metrics at the end of the year, then they get the full percentage. We hold back about 25% for the year-end incentive comp. So we have clinical gates and we also have financial, but it's a very simplified incentive comp model that you could do it. And our goal is to have the administrator and DON be able to calculate it on their own to see what they're going to be getting and manage to it, because it helps with cost and also at the end of the year in census.
So the kind of ratios that I've heard about in California are that an administrator might get, like, say, between 10 and 14. Is that a range that you've heard of?
Yep. Yeah, that's it. In California. That's about
of the bottom line EBITDA, and a DON might get, say, between 3 and 6%. Is
correct? Yeah, those are the ranges.
So,
and let me just clarify. I'm sorry, Mark. That every operator, I think, does something different on those ranges to different levels.
Yeah.
So they're not all the same.
So the result is that, you think about an average administrator in the United States, the data shows that the average administrator is making about $140,000. I assume that with this model, people are blowing those kind of numbers away?
Oh yeah, we have administrators who are doubling their net income from their own base salary or more than so. So, and if they're and how I look at it, if they're not meeting those plans and not beating the bonuses, then I question their abilities.
So your administrators and DONs have a base salary that would be somewhat comparable to maybe a national average type number, but then in addition to that, they have this EBITDA opportunity.
Exactly, yes.
What if their building is stuck with a bunch of debt or a challenging lease? Because do they absorb that as well, or is that somehow?
They absorb it.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
It depends on what it is. It was something that was a long-standing issue that's been the building with the compensation for a long time, like a rent per se, and was a change while they're there. That would be we would look at that, but typically whatever they own, whatever they inherit, they need to manage past it, just like their book of business. We look at it like it's their own book of business, they need to manage past it.
Okay. I'm going to come back to you and talk with you about how it works and how these gatekeeper that you have in place work, but I want to turn to Mike now. Mike, can you just explain your system?
Yeah, I think it's really similar to kind of what Lance explained. We have a pretty simplified model. Our administrators get a percentage of net income, and then our directors of nursing get a smaller percentage. And they're the exact same model, which a lot of compensation plans you have, 4 or 5 different things that maybe the DON bonus is on, like 5-star or QMs or survey. We did away with that because we really want them to be aligned, because if you're aligned financially with your administrator and DON, then those other things we feel like are going to follow. We pay ours monthly. And we pay it 90 days in the arrears. We don't reserve anything. That's a little bit different on our plan. We don't reserve anything, save for if there's some sort of unusual event, which we would need to, go past an accrual, like, if there's a legal event or if there's a survey that we want to hold back on. But for the most part, we pay every month, and that's kind of the process.
And the ratios that we talked about, that 10 to 14% range and 3 to 6, that's kind of the range that you are.
Yeah. And I think some companies kind of take the mantra that we can pay less and incentivize more. But the challenge is that you're not going to ever attract the talent. So we do pay market for all of our administrators. So if there's a building down the street that's only doing, only paying the base salary, or they have some sort of, percentage of their salary, it's hard for them to compete with buildings like ours, because we're paying the same salaries, but then we're offering this compensation.
So you referenced some other goals other than EBITDA. Are there other goals that are attached to it for them to get the EBITDA?
Not for us, because if you're not collecting your cash, you're not going to make your bonus, and you're not going to last. If you're not going to have good clinical outcomes, you have a bad survey, you're not going to last. You know, we're attracting people that aren't, and this is not a derogatory statement, but this happens a lot of times where you see sort of, you know, a maintenance director, a business office director that somehow you think, oh, they're going to make a great administrator. In California, you see very sharp businessmen and women that are leading these buildings. They have finance degrees, and so we say you're responsible for this business, and so no gates. If you can't drive this thing the right direction, then you're not going to make it.
So you also have a base rate that would be comparable to maybe what a normal administrator rate would be, but then on top of that, and is the bonus opportunity like double or triple that kind of number? Or
yeah. I mean, it can be double, triple, quadruple depending on how well the administrator does. And just like Lance, we don't hold anything back, because if you start horse trading, then you could really say, well, you're a new administrator and you weren't there during the cost report period, so those Medi-Cal rates, those Medicaid rates aren't yours, so we're going to pull that back. So you know, if you have a bad year on Medicaid rates, you got to own it, and you got to perform better as a result of it. If you had a legal issue that you needed to settle, those are all a part of the business, and you got to manage around those.
Yeah.
Tim, can you explain your system?
Yeah, I could just say, yeah, what they said. That works. It's very similar. Our administrators get a flat percentage of the bottom line, so the EBIT, not EBITDA, and so do our directors of nursing. We do hold back. We do a 25% hold back for the end of the year. But I think something unique that we do is we work, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but in this field-driven model, we actually have it set up where they are working usually geographically with a couple other facilities, and we call them teams. Some organizations call them clusters. But that 25% could actually double or completely go away, depending on how well their cohort of buildings does. So it gives this team incentive. So not only are they incentivized off their facility, they're also incentivized off their team. We do one other thing where we have actually set a financial benchmark for each facility where if they earn so much over the lifespan of their building, we call it a long-term incentive. So I'll just throw out a number. So hey, if this building makes $1 million, they get another incentive that's paid back over the next 3 years. So every time their facility earns whatever it is, $1 million in EBIT, that they can add on another incentive that continues to grow. So it kind of gives them that incentive to stay in the facility long time and drive that business and hit these financial targets, so that, I mean, we have some administrators that they'll get multiple of those incentives in a year because they've stacked them over years of time.
So again, when you think about $140,000 average administrator salary in the U.S., you have people making double, triple.
We do, yeah, we do.
Yeah. Now, when people ask me how this is possible, it's really a pretty simple math equation. If you're paying out like 16% of your EBITDA, in order to make this work, you have to grow the EBITDA by 16%. And if you do that, you're at break even. If you grow it more than 16%, you're actually going to make money on this idea. Yeah. I think something that people have a hard time identifying with or understanding, and Mike brought it up, so I want to make sure we talk about it, is when you do this, you get a different type of leader running your buildings. You don't get the average, and I don't mean to disparage any of the administrators out there, but you just get a different, talk with us about Lance, and I'll have each of you discuss that.
No, I think you get a higher level administrator, and in California, to compete as an operator, you have to have those type of incentives. Like I compete with Mike, and so my incentives need to get close to where they're at, or I may have the chance, because administrators know, they'll weigh it out where they're going to land, and those who are talented are going to make the right choice that's going to benefit their family. So I think you do attract a talent. You do attract someone who owns the business, who wants to make a difference in the community, but also has an eye, because once they get that taste of that incentive comp that they pay on a quarterly or monthly basis, then they're driving things a lot differently. And it takes a minute to get them into it. When we rolled it out, it took a minute. But once they got the taste of it, then they start looking at things a lot differently. And it made a big difference in the business.
Mike, who are some of the folks that if you want to describe some of the leaders that you have in their backgrounds, or just generally what you've seen with this?
I mean, one of the challenges in the roles that we have is because of the level of leadership you have. You have some very high level people who are it's when they come into business meetings, they're pushing us as much as we're pushing them. And I think that's a benefit of it. You see a lot more people with finance degrees coming through, a lot more people that have maybe been successful in a venture of their own, and they realize that I can go do what I know how to do, and I can work for another organization and double what I'm making working for myself. So you have very strategic thinkers that are coming to the table. And I will say, this is a little dangerous for us to share what we're all doing. We've never shared each other's plans before, so if any of my administrators go work for Lance next week,
I know
we're going to charge eCap.
I've noticed that none of you gave specific numbers, which I think is smart.
We kind of danced around it. But I think here's what I'll say. For us, Tim was talking about, you have vested leaders. So we're really not competing against each other for leaders. We've not had an administrator leave on their own accord in the last 3.5 years. And we've not hired anybody from Cambridge, which means they're probably not leaving there either, because they're vested, whether it's monthly, whether it's quarterly, whether there's something at the end. They're always looking at knowing, I had this month and I had this month, I stack them together, and I've got this big payday coming. And you just continue that going, and it keeps really solid leaders for a long period of time.
Yeah, I'll just add one piece. And if they're not hitting their incentive, I look at it like that's a weakness in the administrator. I think it's valuable that they look at things differently. They build a business. And if they're falling flat every month or every quarter, then it's probably a time for a change.
Yep. Tim, do you want to talk a little bit about the leaders you've been able to recruit?
Yeah, so I actually subscribe to, and no offense to anybody who's been in the industry for a really long time, we like those folks too. But if someone comes to us and they've been an administrator for 20 or 25 years with a super top-down organization, we look at them really, really closely. I won't say we don't look at them, but we look at them really, really closely. We love people from outside the industry, kind of like what Mike was saying. We have folks that have joined our organization last year that, ran all of distribution for the West Coast for a major department store. We have folks that were firefighters. We have folks that they just bring a different perspective into our industry. And what we're looking for are entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurs come from everywhere, especially firefighters, interestingly enough. They all have little odd side jobs, right? But people that, we have somebody who's running our home office now, but he was running home office for tech companies and took a couple of tech companies public. And so it's like you just get this different perspective, and we really feel that we can teach people the nuts and bolts. And we don't want to overcomplicate the industry we're in. Yeah, some of the reimbursement in different states is super complicated, and some of the hurdles that we have are complicated, but we can teach those things. But what you can't teach is drive, being entrepreneurial, and just hungry.
Okay, so time is going really quickly. So we've got so many things we want to get out. I'm going to shift to a good question that people ask, which is, if you're just incentivizing the bottom line, what keeps somebody from just abusing the hell out of the thing, slashing staff, trying to create profits at the cost of outcomes, et cetera? So if we could just go down, I'll start with you, Tim. If you could just, what safeguards do people have to put to make sure that doesn't happen?
So we have, which traditionally you would call regional folks. We have what we call resources. So we do have people from the organization that are in the facilities. We still do audits. I think the difference is in our resource versus maybe a regional or divisional person coming in is that when our resources come in and they do an audit, they make a list of things that you need to fix, and then they stay there and fix them with you instead of, hey, I'll be back in 2 weeks. These better be fixed. So that's like the top-down mentality. So we actually have resources out in the field that are in the buildings watching over these things, but they're doing it more in a collaborative method and as more of a partnership than, hey, I'm here as your boss and telling you what to do. So we do have eyes on. Our home office, we call it the service center because we feel like it's there to serve the field. But the purpose of the home office is to serve the field, but it's also to protect the organization as a whole. So we have experts that work in every department of the home office that, yes, we're there to work collaboratively with the field, but they're also there as a backstop to protect the organization.
Okay. Mike?
Yeah, I think I agree with that. We have people that are out in the field as well. We call ours Brea. Everybody names it something different so that it doesn't feel like corporate. But so we call ours Brea because it's in the town of Brea, so we're not very clever. But our Brea office is there, and we go in and we do audits and we do surveys. We all have compliance departments. But when it comes to things, like I want to be very clear, like if it comes to a certain Part B billing opportunity that everybody's taken advantage of, our administrators can't make a decision to say, I'm gonna start this program, and all of a sudden you walk into a building one day and they have a lot of RTs in the building or whatever without us knowing that they have a program to back it up. So those kind of things we still very much control. And remember that, somebody, whether it's myself or somebody, is a part of the governing body of each building. So we're responsible for that as well and have ultimate authority over the administrators, and they know that. So you hire people that you can trust, and you got to keep them in line. But we have enough eyes out there that we know what they're doing.
Yeah, we have, we call them resources. So if you Google Cambridge, you won't find any of our buildings listed under Cambridge. So there are resources for the field. There are resources to help them meet their goals. And I also build into our incentive comp certain guardrails. So there are clinical measures in the incentive comp simplified, and there is a net income incentive as well. But we have a somewhat of a traditional model where we have clinicians and regional people who are consultants or resources for the facilities that go into the buildings.
What I have seen in talking to a large number of providers that do this is that they have one of two things, and sometimes they have both. Sometimes they have clinical checks like you have at Cambridge, where it's not just the EBITDA. You got to hit a certain star level. You have to be somewhat close on staffing to a state average, et cetera. Or they also have robust compliance departments, which is what you guys talked about. Somebody that's in the buildings making sure that we're not overdoing it on Part B, we're not cutting any corners, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're going to do this, you're going to have one or both of those things, or else you're going to run into problems.
Absolutely agree.
Okay, now, let me just ask you now, does this work? Have you had buildings that you bought and they were losing massive amounts of cash? You hire a different type of leader, they have these incentives. Tell us what you see, what you've learned in terms of whether this works or not. And Lance, I'll just start with you.
Yeah, I think, first of all, it begins with the leader in the building anyway. So it doesn't matter if it's a bad building or a good building. I think the leader sets the tone. And we have seen it where we put the right leader in who has the right mindset and the right hunger. They can flip the building pretty quickly with the right clinical support. Yes.
Yeah, I agree. I think most of our acquisitions we've doubled in size really since 2021, and most of our acquisitions were distressed, whether it was because of COVID or whatever. So there was a lot of opportunity to grow and need, and so it worked to have that model. I think the biggest challenge for the model too, and this is a little because I made a big part of my career in being sort of that middle management, that regional level, that RVP, that DVP. A lot of companies have. A lot of those people are the ones explaining to the C-suite and the owners why it's a bad idea to give the administrators this kind of authority, because they're really just protecting their job. If you really think about it, no, we can't let them make that decision because they're going to go rogue, and so they need us there. And so you create sort of this necessity. And so in order to make it work, it's not just getting the leaders in the buildings, but then it's understanding your role and not breaking from it all of a sudden growing and saying, next year we need to add 10 more people in the field if that's not really what you need, because they will create their own need over the course of time.
Tim, what have you seen?
Yeah, we did maybe an 8 or 9 building acquisition about 2.5 years ago, and it was what we thought we were going into was a non-top-down organization, and what we realized as soon as we got in there that it was very top-down. And that portfolio as a whole was losing $12 or $13 million a year. And within 9 months, we had to replace almost all of the administrators. Unfortunately, because they were really great people, but the portfolio was performing really poorly. And within the first 9 months, they were all profitable.
Wow.
I mean, you can't argue with that.
Okay, so I started out by saying there's 2 components to this West Coast offense. There's this incentive model, and then the other thing that's just amazing is this decentralized decision-making model. But what I've learned is that you don't have to do both. There are people that are doing the incentive model that are still top-down, and there's nothing wrong with that. There are some incredible top-down companies in the United States. And then there are people that are doing the incentive thing, but they're very decentralized. So let's just kind of go down the row and where do you fit in that?
We're a little hybrid. We have a regional structure who have clinician support and regional support, MDS support, AR support. So we have all support resources for the facilities. However, we do have, they can make their decisions for their own building. So if they want to put some local vendor in, or they want to use this particular person at some consultant level, they have full autonomy. I would say one things we don't we give on would be like PCC, or the larger medical record software. That's a corporate contract. Food, corporate contract. You know, I feel like you don't want them engaged in that, because they should be dealing with what they have to deal with, which would be the business at hand, the families, the regulators. Those corporate contracts, that's what we're paid a management fee for.
Mike, where are you at?
Yeah, we're probably in the middle as well. We have a semblance of management staff that continue to support it, and certainly all the different departments have their support. You know, rehab and AR, and we really do. We manage the big contracts, food, your medical supply, and a lot of times you'll have administrators that come up to you and they'll say, "Hey, I really think we should change, our lab." And I just want to say, just how about manage your overtime by 0.5%, and that's going to make up that $700 that you. So a lot of times you have these people that really want to twist the business so much that they get hung up on some of the little things. We say, let us worry about that. Obviously, we care about service, we care about pricing, but again, let us manage that piece of it, and you focus on, what collaborator are you involved in? Who are you working with? Within the local vendors, and that's kind of where we ask them to spend their time.
Correct.
Yeah, we use PCC. We have some large organizational platforms that are, I guess, what you would call corporate. Even corporate's a four-letter word to us. But so there is, and those are more for efficiency and effectiveness, and really as a protection for the organization as a whole. So we do have to remind leaders in the field where it's like, hey, you can be as entrepreneurial as you want to be, but you have to do it within like the framework of the organization and how the organization is set up. So it's not just like, hey, all hands off, like free reign, you get to do whatever you want. We don't go quite as far as like food contracts and things like that. But when they make those decisions, they do them collaboratively with other administrators from other buildings, usually on a local level. So at least you'll have kind of a cohort of administrators talking about it. And they'll talk about it on a regional level as well. But that's more of our.
I mean, so Tim, when I think about Cascadia, I think of you as very much a decentralized decision. You guys your buildings are making, other than like super high level contracts, they're even making decisions like on food contracts.
Yep.
All of their other vendors, other than say a EMR or, I don't even know, that may be the only one.
Yeah, I heard this, not to interrupt you,
No.
but we are very field driven. And I actually heard this about the Enzyme Group, because this is like a model that maybe started there, is that they were actually able to corporatize the right things. And it was the things that would take away maybe some liability from the facilities, and that's like using PCC. Maybe, hey, every contract you sign has to go through the contracts department, because we don't want to sign some 50-year contract and that we're going to pay millions of dollars on. But you can negotiate whatever price with whatever local vendor you want, but it has to at least be like eyes on by a contract lawyer who actually knows these things.
So like on food contracts, do you think your local buildings get as good of a deal as if you negotiated it for all 40 plus buildings at once, or do you know?
Maybe not, I don't know. Maybe we can get a better contract as an organization, but that's not who we are, and that would kind of take away from that field-driven model that we are trying to push.
What do you call the leaders in your building CEOs?
We call them CEOs.
And who do the teams, the local clusters hire and fire the CEOs, or do you all do that?
Well, so that's the model, and it really, I mean, I think the caveat to all of this is I don't think any of us are perfect at this model either, right? We all have our strengths and weaknesses, and so it is a continuous, growth in this, putting together an organization like this. But we how we try to set it up, and we have it working really well in certain pockets of Cascadia and certain other pockets we're working on it. But really what you want this collaborative environment to be is that the CEOs, because they're incentivized, remember, based off of their cohort, their team of buildings, you want the CEOs to be able to hire the CEOs that go into their team. And likewise, for lack of a better term, they get voted off the island by their team because they're literally affecting the livelihood of each other with their incentive.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got a couple more questions, and we're going to come to the audience in about 10 or 15 minutes to leave 10 or 15 minutes for questions. So if you might be thinking about any question that you might have. So I want to ask about, if I'm out here in the audience and I've got a company in the Midwest or on the East Coast, and I've got 10 or 15 buildings that have a traditional model, because as we sit here today, virtually all of the buildings on the East Coast still have a traditional model, both from a decision-making process and also from an incentive system. Not all. There are a few companies that have been pretty innovative. But if you were hearing this, what would you do? If you decided you wanted to make these changes, how do you start? Because you've got existing administrators that you have relationships with. They're used to making $140,000. Do you just suddenly turn on the switch and do you? What would you do if you were in the audience with that situation? And Lance, I'll start with you.
Well, I think it depends on where you're at as an organization. Like we've interviewed people who have, as administrators, they don't even see their own P&Ls for the company they work for. So if they don't have the P&L savvy or the understanding of how to build a business, it's really more difficult. So if you do have a system where your administrators are seeing their P&Ls, they understand the profit and loss and how the numbers work, I always look at it like it's a pay for, because they got to cover their own incentive comp. So if they're getting a $20,000 monthly incentive comp, but they're only making $20,000 a year on their net income, then they don't get anything. So they made money, but yet their incentive comp washed it away. So not only do they have to get to the bottom line, but they have to cover their own incentive comp, and that's how we look at it.
Okay, so do they have to grow the EBITDA to cover their incentive?
Yeah.
Okay, so that takes the risk out of it for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, interesting. I didn't know that.
No, I mean, I think we're very similar again in that approach. I think, I've had the benefit of working in organizations that didn't do this, organizations that were across the United States, and then coming here and seeing this. I think what Lance said can't be underscored. If you're an organization that's not going to be transparent with how the financials, for us, we share everybody's financials, and everybody can do the math. Hopefully they can do the math and say, they're getting a percentage of that net income and I'm not. What are they doing differently? And it creates this collaboration. But if you don't have that transparency, then you're never going to be able to create it, because how do they know what they're growing from? So if this is a system that you're going to employ, the first thing you've got to do is make sure that you have your system and you are ready to be able to start giving away some more of that information.
And do you have a similar system as Lance, where you've got to grow your EBITDA enough to cover your incentive?
Yeah, I mean, so we do ours based off of net income. And so our calculation, they can never drop below 10% of their net income. So at any given time, they're at least 10% above their net income. Yeah. Otherwise they shut off until they get back over that number.
Got it. And one of the things that I think you bring to this panel that's so helpful is that you all have taken over a lot of buildings and then imposed this system on buildings that didn't have it. Talk about how that's gone. And have you had to change out administrators or what?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, you do have to change out administrators, because if they were sitting there in the system and it wasn't working, then they're used to just sort of, collecting a paycheck. So we certainly have to create an environment for people that are hungry and excited. I think we're probably a little bit more diverse in kind of where we try to find our administrators. We're not the cluster model. Our people will recruit the administrators, but then ultimately myself and a couple others will interview them to make sure that they fit. So we have people that were fantastic division rehab leaders for one of these companies that didn't have strong administrators, but they make a great administrator for us because of the way their mind works. And so I think, again, for us, when you're taking something on that's losing money, you for the most part are going to have to see people that come in that are hungry to change it for you.
Great. Tim?
Yeah, so a caveat to our incentive plan is that all of our facilities have a hurdle that they get a percentage of the net income over a certain hurdle, and that hurdle is set between them and the president of their region or whatnot. So it's not from the first dollar of the EBIT. There is a hurdle in there. But I would say if you're going to try to put this system in place, and if it was a very top-down organization and there was no incentive plan, because I've had this conversation in the last couple months with a few folks on the East Coast where you can't just do the incentive plan. Like the incentive plan, just putting in the incentive plan, I think would kind of breed some resentment too, because now you're getting incentivized off a bottom line that you don't have as much control over, right? So I'm sure there's a way to ease into it, and I think like bits and pieces of it at a time is okay. I do think when you take over some facilities, you will run into some of these leaders who were just like, when the handcuffs come off and when they're not working in that top-down environment anymore, they will just flourish. And so it's like the folks that were like super frustrated with corporate before, those are the ones you really want to keep around, because those are probably the entrepreneurial ones, right? So yeah.
I'm going to ask all of you about unintended consequences in just a second, but before I do that, Tim, I want to come back to your description of your teams, because that's a foreign concept, I think, again, on the East Coast. At Ensign, obviously, they're called clusters.
Right.
But can you talk about what constitutes a team, how many buildings it is, are they is geography important, and then what's the interaction between these teams and then the incentives that are created by them?
Yeah, so usually we try to keep it as geographic as possible. Some places it's hard or it's easier than others. But usually it's 3 to maybe 5 facilities. Usually it's 4. But what we try to create is for the CEOs, the DONs, that's their number one team. Where historically in this industry, the administrator has their department heads and that's their number one team, and they're just focused just on their facility. We actually try to elevate, since we do call them CEOs because they're running their facilities like it's their own business. We try to make the team, is what we call it. Some people call it clusters. We try to make that their number one team, so that because each administrator, like I said, we like to hire from all kinds of different industries. Each administrator has their own strengths and weaknesses, and they can share best practices. And that's really the key, is that those clusters, those teams of buildings, is a place where they interact a lot of times every day. They're a phone call away, they're a text away, but they at least have like a structured, weekly call. They get together depending on geography, maybe sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly. But that is their number one team, is that team of buildings or cluster of buildings. And really, it's just a collaborative place for them to share best practices and learn from each other's mistakes, because they're all going to make mistakes. They can learn from them there. And a key part of it is that they're in each other's buildings. So they're literally visiting each other's facilities, and they'll have a meeting one month at this building and a meeting the next month at that building. And the ones that are really close, they're in each other's buildings almost every week.
And each of them has an economic incentive on the success of all the other buildings.
As a whole.
And that causes them to encourage each other.
So they're asking questions.
When there have to be difficult discussions, difficult discussions occur.
Exactly.
When somebody has to be terminated, all of a sudden. And tell me what I can imagine when somebody's surveyed, does everybody coalesce?
Oh, yeah. So when survey happens, everybody's well fed, that's for sure. But literally the DONs from the other buildings, because they've been in each other's buildings and they do it on a regular basis, they're familiar a lot of times with the staff that's on the floor. So when somebody goes into a survey, the other buildings can literally come over and be a huge support to them, because they're very familiar with the people and the patients that are in the building.
Yep. Let's talk about any unintended consequences of this. Obviously, incentives can run amok and things can occur. I guess 2 questions. What unintended consequences have you seen, if any, and what safeguards would you suggest to encourage people not to face those?
Well, I think one for me I've recently, in the last few years, encountered was our administrators making more than our regional folks.
Yep.
So when it comes time for a regional vacancy to get filled, and they have administrators who are in the field that you think would be great regionals, they would have to take a pay cut to come in to become a regional. Sometimes they do that for the sake of growing and becoming a regional. So that would be one thing you have to think through. But we changed our incentive comp for our regional folks to now get a book of business incentive piece as well. So that hopefully will mitigate some of that.
I was talking to one Midwest company about this system, and we discovered that there are CEOs, administrators in buildings that are making more than the CEO of that organization. So I can see how that can happen. You have any suggested safeguards? I know you.
Well, we changed our incentive comp for our regional folks, so that it does equalize and it does give them a chance to mitigate that earning.
Got it.
Then.
Mike, what do
No, I mean, I kind of see what Lance is saying. I think that always gives us opportunity to then decentralize it. If we have a regional position we can't fill anymore, then we realize that maybe that's the opportunity to promote somebody from within. And so we actually have, we don't do the clusters and the teams. We have 45 buildings and 45 individual teams. They take care of each other, but they're also very competitive. So we have a model where a lot of our region support, if that's what you want to call it, from the operations side are also administrators. And that's how you get around that comp piece of the regionals are upset. Hey, you still have to have your own building and your base still comes out of that. So you're not draining money out of the management company by bonusing people on money that's already been bonused by the building. So the folks, the 5 guys that are on my team that we call regionals, half of them are also administrators in buildings day to day, and that's where still a large portion of their comp comes from.
Tim, how about you?
Yeah, no offense to our presidents, but we actually, which we call our regional ops folks, but we actually want our best talent in the facilities. That's where we want them. Not that our presidents aren't very talented folks, but there are literally administrators in our organization that make more than I do, and I am perfectly fine with that. I know what we're building at Cascadia. I know that that's the way that we're going to build into something bigger and better, and I will have the top talent in a facility all day long. I do think there's maybe 2 pitfalls to the system. One, I think maybe they're in here. There's 3 of them sitting back there, but you have really great entrepreneurs that left our company recently to go do their own thing because they're entrepreneurial, and they're amazing people. They're going to go do amazing things, and sometimes you're like, oh, that kind of sucks.
Right.
But also, it's pretty awesome to see. I think the other one is when you do have maybe a rogue actor that does something where you're like, oh man, this could really hurt the organization as a whole. And that's why we just have to be very collaborative, make sure lines of communication are open, and make sure that our resource teams are in the facilities and the teams are working properly so that we don't have somebody going off totally rogue.
Yeah, but you make a really good point. We now have in the sector hundreds of buildings, maybe approaching 1,000, of entrepreneurs that learned this system and have gone off and replicated it. And I actually think that's a great thing. I know
awesome.
there can be angst, but I think that's really positive. Okay, let's stop and see if anybody in the audience has any questions. Yeah.
Yeah, curious on that culture, your thoughts on developing a cohesive culture across the chain versus letting each.
Here we go. I didn't realize we had a mic, so if you could. Yep.
Thank you. Oh, somewhere in between. Question on culture. The question of basically developing a cohesive culture across a broad organization versus allowing each community to develop its own culture.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Tim, you want to start? You're the most decentralized.
Yeah, so we actually encourage each facility to have their own culture, and even hey, if they want to come up with their own, we have our organizational core values, but if they want to have their own core values at their facility, that's great. But we also, we don't look at culture as all rainbows and sunshines and unicorns either, where it's hey, we have a culture of accountability and a culture of success. So yeah, it kind of depends on what you mean by culture. But that's how we look at it. We want our facilities to have their own kumbaya culture and all that good stuff. And the team might even have a different one between the 4 or 5 buildings or whatever. And then it might even differ a little bit from the organization as a whole. But as long as the standards and the core values of the organization and having a culture of success are aligned in what they're doing at the facility level, then by all means.
One of the things I should have said when I introduced you is that you can obviously do this and also be incredible quality. There's been, I think, of the 6 ACA Gold Awards in the last 4 years, Cascadia has 4 of them. So it's not that you can either make money or do quality. All 3 of these folks prove that you can be a quality operator and make money too. So congratulations on that.
Yeah.
Did anybody else want to answer that question on?
Well, I think just from culturally perspective, I think transparency is key from not only at the building level, but the regional level, and having competition, healthy competition for who's doing the best clinically, and then clinically leads to financial. And I think the clinical indicators is just as important as the financial.
I would say for us, we're fortunate because our buildings are all in one state, so we try to exemplify really good culture. And like, if you have kick-ass culture in your organization, people are going to have that in the buildings, and we see that. We have a lot of fun in our buildings, and then we have a lot of fun as an organization. We invite our teams in to see that. So then when we go in and we don't see that happening in another building, in one of our buildings, that frustrates us more than maybe an off month on census.
Yeah.
You got to be able to invest back into the people.
You know, one thing that I've seen in all of your companies, you all share information. So you're hiring these entrepreneurial people who are pretty competitive, and they're seeing what everybody else is doing, and it seems to create like a friendly competition to do better.
Yes.
There are still companies out there that don't share anything with anybody, and nobody knows what other buildings are doing, et cetera. Yep. Do you have another question?
Hello, good afternoon. Is there a regulatory environment or a state essentially that this type of model doesn't work or isn't the best fit? Because I'm from New Mexico and we don't have any operators like this in New Mexico, so just wondering.
Well, I guess California is probably the most regulated state. I think if you can make this work in California, you could probably make it work in a lot of other states. If that's what you mean.
Well, I guess, and I guess even from a payer standpoint. So New Mexico's MCO state, and so you talk about your individual facilities making these big decisions. So, for example, in the MCO state, do your facilities negotiate? Do your administrators individually negotiate their rates with the MCO, or is that done at a larger corporate level? From our perspective at Cambridge, we have a vice president of contracting who negotiates the rates with the HMOs. So, and we're in California, we're in managed care, Medicaid as well. So those rates the Medicaid rates is set by building. So it's relative to your cost. There's a formula building by building. So it's not negotiated with the state from our perspective, but the HMO rates are negotiated by the building and also by the VP of contracting.
I'd say the same. Our administrators are involved in the rates that they want to see in a negotiation. And so then we have a couple of people on our team, including somebody who does contracting and our chief marketing officer who'll go in and on their behalf negotiate, but knowing the administrator may or may not have a breaking point on that rate.
Because they have to sign. At least ours. The administrator has to sign at the end of the day on that contract.
Yeah, we're the same.
So do your individual buildings don't negotiate?
So they can be involved, and they will be involved, but we have a resource that will do negotiating, and that's their expertise. But they are in constant contact with the administrators of the buildings.
I mean, I think there's a lot of states like New Mexico where there's literally no one doing this. And so the question would be, what would happen if somebody starts doing this? Yeah. And I think we're going to find out the answer to that because many of the West Coast companies are moving east, and folks are going to have to respond to the competition. Let's see, any other questions?
What do you do as your recruiting style? Like, where do you find the right administrators? Because I assume you can't go down the normal path you normally use, right? So how do you go out there and find these unique individuals?
That's a great question, and I bet none of them will give their secret sauce, but that is the ultimate.
I will say that you grow your own. I mean, that's one thing we've seen. Some success is you set up a good AIT program, and then you put them in place the way you've grown them up.
Yeah. Not Indeed. How's that?
Yeah.
No, honestly, most of ours is word of mouth. And we have a lot of friends of friends of friends or family or hey, this person worked with this other person at this company, but they know a guy. A lot of it's word of mouth for us. Like, I think it's, the old adage where it's like, hey, if you hire great people, they will hire great people, and they will create great teams. So the more
Now that
great
I
people
know
we
the
hire,
Mike's-
the more we attract.
Sorry. And now that I know what Mike's paying on incentive comp, I'm going to go
That's
after his administrators.
Good luck. We're giving cars away. No, so honestly, check us out. No, I think it's very similar. We recruit a lot of different ways, but we don't have an issue with people come to us, and we have a steady flow of people reaching out to us, and some we're interested in talking to, some we're not, and then the other administrators who know what it takes within our organization, then therefore know people that would make a good fit.
Is there another question? Because I've got one if we don't have any other right now. Anybody else have a question? Yep.
Apologies if this is too granular, but I'm assuming the incentive programs are based on accrual financials. What happens here, we're in California, we've got all these managed Medicaid payers, and a lot of them are messing up, not paying. How do you true up in the event of bad debt or, something?
That's why we do a withhold. At the end of the year, the AR does count as a percentage of their incentive comp at the end of the year on the collections.
For us, we're paying ours far enough in the arrears that we know what the DSOs are, so we know what's coming in, and so you can see it coming ahead of time. And so there are times where when we're looking at the comps, we'll say we got to put a hold on this because we got to wait for a couple more months and see where we're going. Same would be for accruals on legal items that something's coming. We'll put a hold on things until we can kind of figure out what it's going to look like.
Yeah, we have it written into our contract, and it's a collections percentage, but DSO, same thing. Where once the money's collected, that's when the incentive is paid out.
Tim, I'm going to come to you because you've got the most decentralized model. Obviously, you believe deeply in incentives, and the record speaks for itself. It works. Do you let do the local leaders decide what other incentives there are for other people, so it's not just the CEO and the COO that win?
They do. So each facility gets to decide, what their marketer's incentive is, or if they have sometimes, what their business office manager's incentives are. We let those decisions be made at the local level. I'm very cognizant of, executive salaries and compensation as a whole. And, we're not trying to just create a huge disparity between CNA or housekeeper or dietary worker and the administrator. We really look and encourage, we want to hire folks that want to take care of their people. So that means that you're hiring administrators that would be willing to give incentives or pay higher wages to their people, knowing that it's going to come out of their incentive because it's coming out of the bottom line. Like, that's the magic sauce, is trying to find those folks. But this incentive plan doesn't necessarily work for someone who's just like super greedy and wants to just make as much money as possible for themselves. You have to have that person who wants to take care of their staff, or else the whole system will fall apart.
Once you identify a leader to come into the organization, how long does it take for them to become a CEO? What's the process for?
It depends. Like we have our AIT program. We call it a CIT program because it's a CEO in training, and that's usually 6 months. We try not to do the whole, hey, when you get somebody into an AIT program, you throw them into a building after 2 months, which happens a lot in this industry. But I would say but then we've also had the instances where we hire somebody who's super capable, very high caliber, and they've gone into a building as an operations manager with another license on there, literally day one, and figured it out. And those are very special type leaders, but it's very possible. So I don't know what the average is, to be honest with you, but I would say the average is probably 4 to 6 months, probably more like 6 months, but we try to hire super high caliber folks that can do it much quicker.
And Mike, you guys have done so many acquisitions, you must have to bring people on pretty quick. What's your process?
Well, we try to keep 4 or 5 AITs going at any given time for that reason. And then all of a sudden you wake up and you say, well, we need more. So we try to keep them, in different geographies, so that 6 months is a really good number. They're there too long, and they're gonna get tired of doing that, because a lot of these people, if you're bringing them from other industries, they're actually used to making a higher amount, but they're not making that much as an AIT. So they're taking a big pay cut to become an AIT. So they're motivated to learn and get back into a building. So it's probably about 6 months that it takes us to get them in there.
Yeah, it's same. 6 months to get somebody up and running. We call it a Cambridge Academy. So we kind of teach them the culture of our company and how to go through our dashboards, and it takes a good 6 months to.
Great. Let me see if there's any other questions. We got one. I think we have time for one more. Maybe. Yep.
Hey, how are you? Obviously, a novel approach that we're unfamiliar with, but I got to imagine dealing with the administrators, especially on a turnaround. How do you deal with the CapEx? You must be getting requests to fund CapEx into buildings for the administrators to operate optimally to help their own incentives. So I was just curious how you treat
CapEx.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I mean, the administrators are incentivized off EBIT, right? So the DAR is in there, right? So the more CapEx they spend, the more it's going to hit their incentive as well. So they own the entire P&L. But those are just just conversations we have. I mean, obviously, as an organization, we have to have like a CapEx budget of some sort, so we can't just spend. So yeah, it's priority. It's what's the return on that investment, like all those conversations.
I can see how that can work, but I could also see how it could lead to some short-term decisions. Some of this CapEx that we need to do is there's not gonna be a return in the next 1 or 2 years. So how do you keep it so that somebody's, looking at the long game?
Yeah, we can, right now we have a model of, we actually require a spend of so much per bed every year. And a lot of times that's set up in the lease of a REIT or whatnot. So there will be CapEx put into every building.
Yep.
And so they know that because it's part of their, it's
P&L.
hitting their P&L. So they're gonna know like, hey, we're gonna spend X amount. But we actually leave that set amount every year as a discretionary spend. And the administrator is the one who decides on, hey, we're gonna get carpet or we're gonna get flooring or whatever we're doing.
I think we had one more question in the back. Yep. This will have to be our final question, unfortunately.
Good afternoon. I'm Christine with ProCare, and I have a question for you all. You're all from California, correct?
Yeah, they are.
Okay.
I was born and raised, but we don't have any facilities there
Okay.
yet.
I'm a California girl.
That's right, I forget about that.
But I just have a question when it comes to workforce and avoiding or protecting from the PAGA lawsuits with overtime and the meal breaks and such. What are you looking to change, or what are the things or tools or technology that you're putting in place to avoid those lawsuits?
Clock in, clock out on time, and take your breaks. I think it's a very involved question, to be honest with you. And I think there's a lot of good softwares out there. If you have good scheduling softwares, I think that's helpful. Your time and attendance helps. And then you have people that are managing that within the buildings. And then for us, just the quick and easy answer is, because this is such an issue, we have what we call a labor task force. That is a group of people that kind of manages our labor, our overtime, making sure we're doing a good job of salaries. And they review every building basically quarterly, and that's a part of the conversation in those meetings as we look at the meal times and we track them, just like we track net income and everything. We track and we show all our administrators in every one of our financial meetings that we have where their meal penalties were, where their breaks were, and their overtime.
And by the way, PAGA, if they do get a PAGA, it does hit their bottom line, and then it does affect their incentive comp.
I mean, that issue among all these other issues, you've got at least 2 people in the building that are basically owners that are looking at every line item pretty much every
And I think having transparency, like transparency of all your financials, and you have multiple sets of eyes on it, that you can catch those things a lot quicker.
Well, thank the 3 of you for not only being here, but sharing what I think is some incredibly valuable information. You probably created some more competition in the room, but I think that's a very good thing for the sector, and we thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.